Contemporary Practice Exercise 4.5 Sourcing Materials and Preliminary Samples. Now, this is my sketchbook. I've kind of left it as a little bit more looser open file, and I started off with extracting some bits and pieces from my storage box that I've accumulated over a period of time, and went in and did a mind map just to do some reflection and build up some more ideas, adding in ideas of what I'd learned, what I liked, what I disliked. And I do really like mind maps at this present time because you can add and subtract pieces of information. Through the sketchbook, I have added pieces in where I've done some reflective ideas, and I'd kind of, with some of the samples, looked at the samples and began to look at words that would start to reflect and open up other threads and pathways of ideas. So as we can see, I've started looking at some samples and materials. At this stage, I did realise that we were resourcing the materials rather than, or should I say, it didn't really matter whether I'd used the materials in the past. I think this was a way of inventing or being more inventive with the materials that was going to be applicable with the direction of the assignment, with it being artifacts and archive. But there were some areas I haven't used before, with things like dyeing with tea and coffee, which was just pretty straightforward, and it gave me the results that I wanted to. And then with further investigations, it allowed me to either bleed over the surfaces, print over the surfaces, or use bleach to create some disappearing images and so forth. Some of these images and stains that it was leaving behind started to resonate with things like my local history, with the cemetery and the sandstone finishes. And through here we can see that the bleach, this was actually an accident where bleach had leaked onto the cardboard, resonates fungus that grows on headstones. So as I've processed some of the ideas, I've picked upon where I've engaged with some of my textile contemporary research. I'd looked at Jack Blakewell with the chunky stitching, integrated some of that. I think the one thing that has started to come through in this assignment is a strong use of fragments. I've been working on smaller pieces, and these have kind of just been pieces of paper that I've just then put into a box, and I've pulled them back out and I've reused. This is an example of where edges of the paper had been ripped off, and I wanted to make use of them. So this then led just onto some investigations of working with edges. So you could, draw onto edges, overlay with a little bit of polyfiller, working small scale, and with tiny pieces of fragment, just produced, not samples that were quick to produce, but in actual fact they were harder because they were a little bit more fiddly, but it kind of made it quite a nice way of making the documentation in this sketchbook. And then I've worked here with some fragments, just with some simple freehand stitching, picking up little pieces of paper. I'd sourced what I did use a construction assignment in my contemporary context, and I did actually think of the idea back then with some ideas of edges, so I've brought that into this assignment. Then resourcing past work. This was from Mixed Media, and I'd started to look at weaving paper that was painted in emulsion, as we can see, and then looking at bleaching the surface and then weaving greaseproof paper. As you can see, I'm building up a portfolio, just bullet pointing the various materials. Here I'd started to introduce Keita Jackson because I thought I needed to engage with the colour palette and start to bring what I'd learnt from my textile practitioner artist research. Also, as I'm progressing, I'm being quite investigative because I'd already mentioned that I want to keep paper. So this is some old photographs that I've stitched and crumpled. Photograph paper's very strong, and the imagery there, you can see that was just doorways. That's become quite abstract. And piecing together fragments. I'd started to investigate bleaching fabric, and here there's an old shirt of mine that I've over bleached on the top. And then more preliminary samples. Joshua Good was an inspiration as well. Here are some of my drawings. So again, we can see that there's, through this process, there is a flow. And then obviously researching new materials. Wood stain made a very intriguing finished and results. Going over surfaces that I'd already recorded from my sustainable box that I'd started to create. And as we can see, these surfaces look quite varnished, very museum-like. These are just old pieces of paper from a scrapbook. And some printing that I've just painted over to seal. And then through here, started to work on the preliminary samples, which I've made videos of, layering surfaces and texture. I found that I kind of also started to return back to some other materials that I'd use that were giving me the same textures and format. Picking out some very early work from Textiles Vocabulary. And then I'd gone back to basics here with some basic materials, freehand stitching. And then through here, I've started to keep samples of fabric that I've been working with, or I've been making some very good resourceful colours with the ink and the tea. Again, I can overprint and I can bleach. And then I'd worked through here on the ideas of memories in a pocket, where I'd recycled my tea bags, and then with the little empty pockets of paper tea bags, I've started to experiment with the ink and the bleach, and I've gone back to the wordings and decay of the local history with the cemetery. Some of these results have been proven to be quite successful. And then finally, the fragments that were left over at the end of working days, I've just stitched together just to see what would happen with the array and the collection of the assortment and oddments. Again, trying to make the project sustainable. And obviously we can see that they're all very different. They're nice and textural, and I kind of quite like these because I don't really ever think about it. Just put them together and sew them, and then you end up with some interesting abstract pieces. So this is my sketchbook for resource and materials and preliminary samples.